Hi, I'm kind of the bad guy actually because I'm a doctorate at the University of Chichester. My name's Esther McCallum-Stewart, which is actually a university that at the moment I'm still struggling with the library, because when I went to them and said I need to teach a games course as part of our media studies course, the reply was, but if we put games in the library, students might play them. Yes, they might. I research online communities and players, so that's kind of, and I'm sort of going to be introducing the other two as well and sort of prefacing this talk. So.
Okay, I'm not mic'd up.
Oh.
Is this? Hello? Yeah. Okay. I'm Mithu Kandekar. I'm primarily an indie game developer at my one-woman studio, The Tiniest Shark. I'm also a part-time PhD researcher at the University of Portsmouth. My research stuff is nothing to do with sort of love and stuff in games. It's kind of, but my interest in all this comes from this sort of wider-ranging interest in sort of games as tools of both expression, expressing ideas and interrogating ideas, and of course, sort of, you know, games are. I mean, love is obviously one of the most sort of personal things that you can sort of try and express. So there's that. And I'm also a member of the Digital Romance Lab initiative started by Martin Hollis of GoldenEye fame and Jane Pinkard of UC Santa Cruz, which is sort of like a tiny sort of think tank almost, which kind of where we talk about sort of how games can tackle themes of love and romance. So that's me.
Will this be on? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Ashley Brown. I'm based at the University of Manchester. I'm just about to submit my PhD. I'm based in sociology there, and I study erotic role-playing, and I study on tabletop and also in World of Warcraft. So I'm interested in sexuality and also this kind of friendship and love that develops between players that deal with erotic and adult content. I'm also on the DIGRA board. I'm the student representative, so we run a forum, Facebook group, all that kind of stuff for people that study digital games. So please look us up. Please join if you're into that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, right, yeah, and DIGRA is the Digital Games Research Association. So we've got three separate presentations looking at different aspects of love and gaming. And the first one, Esther's going to tell us the difference between love, sex, and the female gamer.
Okay, cool.
Presentation?
Yeah, presentation.
Awesome.
Okay, so that's me. Okay, so I kind of want to start by sort of separating some of the ideas that are going to come up. I should also point out that the pictures of boobs aren't till the end, so if you could stay awake for them, that's kind of cool. But, you know, there's this kind of prurience about this issue. And I was actually saying earlier, it's kind of, I feel a bit annoyed that it's like the women who are speaking today are actually the women that are speaking on the sort of, you know, the sexy bit. This isn't going to be a rant about what should and shouldn't be in games. Obviously, first of all, I'm not a designer, and secondly, I really took to heart something that Rhianna Pratchett said recently when she was talking about writing, and she said, you know, we should really stop criticising what's not there, and we should start talking about what we should start to put in. You know, we need to start thinking about it. It's all very well for people to say, that's crap, this doesn't work. Well, let's think about how we can do it. I mean, you know, the Coder Dojo is an absolutely sterling example of not just saying, this isn't happening, but actually, this is what we should be doing. So first of all, just to sort of go over this party line about the insertion of particularly sex and relationships in games, which is that there is a demographic that exists and it's being kind of pandered to, because that's kind of, you know, we're looking at this very hardcore gamer. The hardcore gamer behaves in a certain way, and therefore we should give them what they want. Well, that's bullshit. I didn't really have to go very far to find difficult or different statistics that showed that the gamer isn't that flat demographic. It's not the 18 to 25-year-old male. You know, they consume in a certain area, and yes, you know, people can say, oh, well, you know, the female gamer makes up the casual market. Well, yeah, yes and no. You know, that's really changing. That's really changing very quickly. And it's particularly when you look at who's buying games in terms of both female buyers and this kind of pester power, then there's a very sort of different demographic that's emerging. So it's a kind of real, you know, we can't make that assertion anymore. So my argument was that this kind of what used to be the core gamer is not anymore. It's actually caused quite a lot of problems. You need to look at things like the Anna Sarkeesian Kickstarter again to sort of see the kind of problems that it's caused. And also people like Ernest Adams, who recently released the call to gamers to basically man up and stop behaving so childishly. You know, this kind of perception that we can behave in quite a sort of naughty way is actually really destroying gaming communities. And it's not just women versus men, it's the whole community is kind of being destroyed by a very sort of visible, voluble minority, who again are the ones that the media picks up on. So I then kind of wanted to say that there is this kind of confusion between the woman gamer, relationships in games, and indeed sex in games. And they're not kind of the same thing, but they are sort of lumped together because of this sort of very sort of problematic interchange that tends to sort of turn up. And again, you know, I'm not going to make you feel uncomfortable, but it is all a bit kind of, oh, brilliant, you know, there's going to be a naughty presentation at the end of the day, and I'm really sorry that, you know, that this has happened. But
I think I might have something that works.
Yeah, cool.
Maybe. Can you try the VGA one again? Because just made it a QuickTime movie. Maybe that'll work. Or you're already too far down this process. Okay. Never mind.
So one of the things that we wanted to do to kind of combat this is I'm actually editing a book at the moment with Jessica Ennevold from Malmö in Sweden about the different types of love and relationships in games. And again, Me Too is doing similar things with Jane Pinkard. Is it Santa Cruz or is it? Yeah. At Santa Cruz. So just kind of investigating the different types of love, sex and relationships in games, and why are they popular? Like, what works, what doesn't work? And then Anne had a fantastic slide, which is a shame you can't see, of sort of, all right. Okay, cool slides. Okay, so
It's probably about 5 minutes. Who knows?
I know, yeah. So what I wanted to say is, like, what do we love? Because as gamers, there are some things that we really do like. We love Mario, but, like, Mario's a plumber with a moustache. So, like, why do we love him? Like, and particularly at the moment, last week, Orcs Must Die 2 came out. And I wanted to kind of use this character of the War Mage, because the War Mage is this guy. He's meant to be this kind of amazing, hunky hero, but he's a complete doofus. He's really useless, and he's really loved by gamers. They love playing him. They love the fact that he messes up. They love his kind of characteristics, and yet, kind of sexually, he's kind of the idealized man, and he sort of subverts that. And this is actually one of the quotes from the first game, which then has been made into a really fantastic piece of fan art. So on a sort of personal note, I wanted to go through, like, who do I love? Well, first of all, there's the guys, and I love these guys. I'm still a bit sort of worried by the fact that poor old scoundrel from Diablo 3 there has a condom above his head. But sorry about that. Guybrush Threepwood, you know, we're still using Monkey Island as an example of a classic game, but he is a fantastic character. Dungeons of Dreadmore, a character who doesn't speak, and yet, again, very much affection for him. It's fantastic playing with him, you know, the sort of the way that he walks. It's very much like Lara Croft hitting her nose, you know, and you sort of feel that sort of tension. The War Mage again. And Ezio, who I think is probably the only sort of hunk in the pack, and yet, again, his relationships, his dialogue, the fact that obviously he returns in the recent Assassin's Creed, you know, to sort of a much kind of fan hurrah, and, you know, he's managed to make it at the end of the game. There's a sort of, I have a real sort of sense of love and sometimes lust for these guys. You know, I do really like them. But then there are other people that I like, and these are kind of me's. These are people who I have loved over years. You know, there's Shell, there's me and Honeychew. You know, there's my weird puzzle pirate, there's more Portal, there's my WoW character. You know, I love my WoW character, but obviously in a very different way. So we've changed the semantic. We're using words in a very different way, and yet we're still describing the same thing. And again, that's a real design conundrum, isn't it? You know, where do we produce that? Where do we get that from? Because again, this isn't really about sex. You know, I don't particularly want to have sex with a companion cube. I could have sex on a companion cube, maybe. And again, games, like what games do I love? Well, Monkey Island, back again. Torchlight, I love that thrill of just, smashing the crap out of things, the rush that it gives me when I get to the end of the level. I love Minecraft. I was geek enough to look up the first ever uploaded screenshot of Minecraft to be able to put it up there, And I love Magic the Gathering. I love playing Magic with my friends. I love playing it with other people and heading out. We did a draft on Saturday. It was really exciting. That moment where you open the pack and, you get that little thrill, like, what's my rare card going to be? What's the card that's going to kind of happen going to be? So I wanted to sort of pull out 3 of those and just quickly talk again about differing relationships. Well, why do I love, this is Neve in the middle of my screen here. Why do I love her? Well, I spent so much time with her. I spent so much time with her playing and, making that strong bond. And yet there are hundreds and thousands, probably, hundreds of thousands of night elves that look exactly the same. There's Shell, who I love, but I also love to hate GLaDOS. Which one do I love the most? Do I love it when, again, people who've played Portal 2 will have known that kind of thrill of watching your teammate die. It's just this kind of, you drop them into the slime and you feel that kind of, again, very sort of visceral satisfaction in what happens. And then back to Honeydew again. Does anybody know who Honeydew is? Okay, good man. I salute you. So Honeydew is actually the alter ego of a man called Simon Lane, who is one half or kind of one part of a webcasting group called the Yogscast. The Yogscast are the #1 subscribed YouTube channel in the UK, and we were talking about YouTube earlier. They upload videos every day, sometimes 2 or 3 of them, and they're watched by over 1 million people a day. And in fact, they've just celebrated having over 1 billion views. So these guys are watched. They do playthroughs of games. They actually did a lot of work in Minecraft where they kind of created a story, and this is Simon's character in Minecraft. But the reason that they're loved is that Simon himself actually sort of typifies the nerd. He's like a kind of slight overweight beardy guy. He's in his late 30s. He's kind of funny. He's kind of the person that we wish we are. He's turned into a very unlikely sex symbol as well, which he has so much trouble dealing with that, again, it gives him that kind of warm age endearingness, actually. But he's trusted. People, we're talking, again, Google were talking earlier, Warren's talking earlier about the ways in which we watch these things and we trust those reviews. This guy is kind of, he single-handedly picked up, well, with the other guy, a couple of games that haven't been doing very well. Dead Island, although it had very good pre-reviews, when it came out, people were saying it's not very good. These two played it. They exposed all the faults in it. But people loved that. They loved the fact that they were making mistakes, and they thought, I'd like to play that game and see how the clipping doesn't work and how you can just jump between bits and pieces of the island. So the sort of affection, again, and the very, very strong relationship that's there is a real kind of tangible thing. Yep. So what do we like about games? What is that grail? They're engaging. They're narrative-driven. Sorry, people who think that it is just, putting things together. Sexiness seems to come from being quite witty, being quite self-effacing, that we love to hate things, that they're challenging, that we feel that we're actually getting some sort of personal investment, that they sometimes break the fourth wall, they look at the camera. And that we put that on ourselves, that these relationships, they're so difficult to make because we're kind of creating them within our own heads through what I call quiet role play. And I don't think I'm going to talk about this, just to sort of simply say that, again, one of the things that we wanted to do with the Game Love book was just to say, look, we know as designers, as developers, as theoreticians, as people who study and love games, that it is time for us to grow up. We know that. We've had all the base theory, we've had all the games have got to change, but now we need to do it. Now we actually need to sort of start making what we've done before, and we need to sort of really do it. And what I want to do is kind of turn over to Mitu and Ashley, who I think are going to show some examples about how people are doing that, where we're getting this kind of brilliance from, and where we are actually kind of growing into having sex with games. So thank you. Okay.
Okay. I've already introduced myself, so I'll skip that one. So my part of the talk is entitled "Love. What does it mean?" I don't mean like that, but I'm sort of asking this question in sort of like two ways, really. So as players, sort of what do we mean when we talk about sort of games about love or whatever, right? What qualifies as a game about love and relationships? And also as developers, what does it mean to design a game about love and relationships? Because they're enormously diverse topics and we can tackle them in a huge number of ways. And love itself is such a complex thing. And it's, both deeply personal and really universal at the same time. So I'm going to preface the presentation with two things. So one of my pet peeves when talking about love and relationships in games is people do tend to conflate that discussion with talking about sex, right? Sort of every sort of talk or whatever I've been to about sort of love and games ends up talking about sex, and that's fine. But they don't always mean the same thing. And I think this sort of little Venn diagram is sort of more reflective of what it actually looks like. You can have games about love, you can have games about sex, and you can have games about both, sexy love, whatever. And each of these are incredibly sort of diverse, rich areas in themselves, which we haven't really even begun to explore through games. So I'm also going to just limit the scope of what I'm talking about to single-player games, because I think the order of complexity increases quite significantly when you're going from one person negotiating with a system of rules to two people negotiating with both a system of rules and with each other. And I know Ashley's going to talk about sort of like how all this stuff applies to MMOs and stuff, so she'll cover that, but I'm going to talk about single-player games. So to start off, to sort of pick up on the sort of lovely thread that Esther started about stuff that she loves in games, I'm going to talk about three lovely games about love, which I've loved. And they all happen to be somehow related to various celestial objects. So firstly, one game from a few years ago now by Daniel Benmergui, who made the IGF Nuovo award-winning Storyteller. One of the games of this style that he made was I Wish I Were the Moon. And this is a really lovely, simple game. And it's kind of basically about this unrequited romance, right? So this boy's in love with the moon and the girl's in love with him. But it's all about sort of just moving things around spatially. And that sort of reflects like the sort of emotional problem space. So you can sort of manipulate things, and it's really lovely, but it is obviously quite limited as well. But it's still really lovely. Another game I really love is To the Moon, which is a really lovely indie game. I think it was made with Game Maker. And it's basically, it's been sort of criticised for not being sort of very procedurally interesting, because it's been likened to sort of like, a visual novel or whatever. But the story is about sort of an old dying man who, and you're sort of trying to explore his past memories about this romance of his, and sort of why things went wrong, etc. But given that the narrative is about sort of exploring things and finding things, it does kind of like match up quite well. So I think it's a really, really lovely example. And thirdly, this game, The End of Us, it was made at a game jam by a couple of friends of mine, and the game sort of plays out in about 3 minutes or so. It's not very long at all. And it's basically about playing this meteor hurtling through space, and you meet up with another meteor, and it basically just reflects how a relationship, sort of the course of a relationship, basically sort of getting together and then drifting apart, and basically what I really like about it is the way that, so the rules are very simple, and all the game does is manipulate the speed at which your meteor moves in relation to the other one, and somehow that really simple rule ends up sort of creating this really beautiful dynamic, which kind of really does sort of, it does invoke a lot of emotion, and I think that one of the other really lovely things about this story is the two people who made the game together, Chelsea Howe and Michael Molinari. They ended up getting together. So that's a really lovely thing in the context of making this game jam game about love. So Okay. Gosh, I'll go really quickly. So basically, games are all about expressing through rules these sort of subjective beliefs that we have about love and relationships and how they work, right? So I've looked at these games which kind of tell these poignant love stories, and sort of one of the things that I really love, if I go back, about this game is it's a good example of what I've just decided to call like romantic or sort of emotional synesthesia. It's kind of about portraying through the game mechanic what it feels like to be in a relationship, what it feels like to love, which I think is sort of like a really lovely notion. But if we move forward to sort of when we want the player to not only play out sort of somebody else's love story, but to sort of try and look at exploring relationships of their own in games and stuff. So negotiating like the pursuit and the maintenance of a relationship. So what does that mean? And I think sort of, the ideal for games is that they should be sort of about combinations of simple rules which kind of give rise to complexity, essentially. And that's really sort of, I love that idea. But so I wanted to kind of echo like a point that Esther started to make about sort of titillation, right? And how so far sort of, the AAA standard for romance in games is generally about sort of dialogue trees, which is kind of a very shallow attempt at sort of actually modelling how the pursuit of relationships and such works. And it tends to be that these things feel very sort of tacked on, very binary, and it essentially becomes sort of saying like the correct sequence of things, and just basically being nice to the other characters in order to get laid, which is problematic. And I don't think the Mass Effect games are bad at all, and I certainly enjoy them. But they sort of express this slightly problematic sort of model of how relationships work. It's like you say the right things and then you'll get to sleep with someone, and that's kind of reflective of this sort of set of beliefs of a certain demographic of people, I think, adolescent boys and people who are still adolescent boys in their heads. And I love this image macro. So it kind of reinforces some of that status quo, right? That thinking that that just being nice to a woman is like, and sex is like a sort of, it's like a means to an end to sex, which is awful, obviously. So some of this stuff is stuff I've been thinking of because I'm working on a life sim game at the moment at my studio, The Tiniest Shark. It's called Redshirt, and it's all about sort of it's a sci-fi comedy game, all about the intrigue and the drama of social networking, but set on a sort of future space station. So you're basically a really insignificant character who's trying to manage their social life, work life, and of course your love life. So then this involved obviously trying to sort of sit down and unpack what the process of like falling in love and being attracted to someone is all about, because it's kind of part of the human experience that's unknowable. And yes, all we can do is try and make our best guesses, our best theories, our best models for sort of trying to figure out what that actually involves, right? Okay, I will try. Okay, so I'm not going to play this video, but I was going to talk about how looking at sort of conventional wisdom and then trying to go against that. So I was going to say how... So even though the game is this sort of humorously dystopian look at the status quo of how we use like social technology and sort of the absurdity of social maneuvering, I wanted the game to be sort of like this idealistic future in which we're sort of free from the status quo of how we think about sexuality and gender politics and things at the moment. So given that, I tried to formulate my own model of what falling in love with someone might mean. Here's like a very basic overview of what I started sort of looking at. So it's basically every time somebody, so this is in the context of people you're already friends with in the game, NPCs that you're already friends with. So how does an NPC decide if they're going to fall in love with another NPC or with your character? And so when something nice happens between the two of you, there's like a random chance, depending on like the individual NPC's propensity for falling in love, for that to actually happen. And I've tried as best as possible to sort of model sexuality and stuff in the game as well, and so that's kind of accounted for. So we'll wrap up. Let's keep going. Okay, so I'm going to skip over all this stuff. So basically, what I'm trying to say is I tried to break down my own sort of mental model of what I think, sort of my own subjective views on falling in love are, and that's probably going to be different for everybody else, right? And it's going to be different for you, it's going to be different for the person next to you. And ultimately, sort of like, I guess I ended up going down a route which was going to make the model very complex, but it's kind of, there are so many unknown variables, and maybe in the end it is a little bit random, which is what I ended up sort of modeling in the end. So I guess I just find the whole process interesting because, right, it's kind of reflective of sort of, again, this sort of the way that games express this set of subjective beliefs that we hold about the relationships and love and how they work. And I just think as designers, as developers, we need to actually sort of think carefully about what our own beliefs about that are, rather than simply just reflecting the beliefs of what we think our audience might think. Which kind of ends up being this, I guess. So a quick note on sort of games by LGBT game designers and creators. I read a really fantastic article the other day in which...
After invading us if you don't stop.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. All right. Anyway, basically play games by people from all kinds of perspectives because it's really good for everybody. Basically, I don't know whether the sort of sum of all our sort of subjective, if more people made games from their own subjective perspectives about love and what that actually means, we'd kind of end up towards this sum total of sort of maybe what love is, but maybe we won't, and maybe that's okay, but I just think that maybe it'll just make us better as people. So anyway, that's me.
This is clicky thingy, and it works, right? Yep. I can use clicky thingy. Okay. I'm Ashley. I already introduced myself, but just really quickly, these are my World of Warcraft characters, who I'm still absolutely obsessed with. I know it's old news, but I'm presenting data from my PhD study, in which I did an ethnography and kind of talked to people that erotic roleplay. And I did that with tabletop role players as well as World of Warcraft people. It doesn't work. No. Okay. That means I can't bounce around. Right. Okay. So really quickly, I'm going to establish, and I know this is a very difficult argument to make, but people want adult content in games. Adults want to play adult games. Right. So I don't know how much convincing I'm going to have to do of that. I'm going to talk about why MMOs are interesting in this perspective and how PEGI and the ESRB kind of influence this interestingness. So, sex as a story. Sex is a good motivator. And this comes from the Book of Erotic Fantasy. So what I'm trying to establish here is tabletop role players get it. They understand that sex is fun to play with. So in the introduction, the authors write, all manner of magic, action, and adventure have been covered, but sex beyond courtly love, vague references, or euphemisms has been curiously absent from most games. Until now, there really haven't been rules or guidelines of incorporating one of the most important classical story drivers of adventure and intrigue, sex. The world has changed, and it's time for fantasy role-playing to change and to mature. And so, but they understand that you can also have fun with games, right? So this table is one of my favorites because it's on performance. So you roll a dice to see how well you perform, and if you're trying to sleep with someone to manipulate them, and you sleep with them really well, then you get a +5 to your diplomacy checks. So you can convince them to do what you want to do. So it's okay to play with this. And then again, single players, I'm not going to dwell on this, but to a lesser extent, they get it. There's sex in games. We understand that there needs to be adult content for adults. My participants, and here's some excerpts from them. In World of Warcraft, sex is kind of banned. You can't do that, and I'll explain why later. So instead, players find ways, really interesting creative ways to put sex into their game. These two, Megan and Caleb, ran a forum, and they said there is a demand for it. Quite simply, there is a market here. There is a demand for it. They're doing really interesting things to get around this rule. And they reflect this idea that we're adults, we want to associate with other adults, and we want to play with sex. Green Hat had a brilliant, I let my participants name themselves, by the way. So she had a really interesting perspective. She said it's another way of defining a relationship with a character, meaning you feel feelings for your character, you love your character, you want them to be happy, you might want them to have children, and you have children through sex, obviously. So there's all sorts of ways why you might want to have sex, right? So since we all play adult characters, doesn't it make sense that they would have adult feelings and adult interactions? This is role-playing, right? We get it. So another way players put this in, and these are screenshots, because I always get the question, well, how do they do erotic role-play? They put their characters together in these really, really creative ways to kind of simulate sexual content. So, I mean, this was at a guild party where the orc was married to a troll, and they were in a lesbian relationship, and she knew that her partner would get really angry and She-Hulk if she were lap dancing on a guy. So that's why she did it, and it was very funny, and it caused loads of really funny drama. I was actually flying around looking for a cool role-play spot to host like a barbecue or something for the guild, and I found these two ladies having a special sexy campfire, but you don't know what they're doing, like, right? So there's no like animation to have sex. This is all done in private chat, because if you use private chat, then there's no way for the GMs to find out, and there's no way for you to get banned. So the next slide I have needs to not be filmed, but you said it would be edited out, right? So besides doing the stuff in game, they make forum posts. They write these really long, intricate stories. I mean, literally hundreds of pages of stories. And they make art. They exchange art. So part of it was done like for birthday gifts. One person would draw the characters in a really special moment. Also, it was commissioned. And so we see this developing of a relationship between players. Like there is actual, genuine affection for between players. Not necessarily sexual, but a good friendship. So what's the problem here? MMOs are subscription-based. We know this, right? So you're very intelligent people. I'm sure you can work this out. If you say only 18 and ups are able to play the game, you're limiting your market. You're limiting who you can advertise to. You're limiting potentially who can play your game. So the ESRB, which is in North America, says that in World of Warcraft's rated T for teen, they say suggestive themes, infrequent use of strong language is like the upper limit. That's all you can do. Likewise, PEGI in Europe, which is now enforceable, you have to show IDs to get 18 games. They rate it in age 12, so it says mild bad language is all you can do. So how Blizzard enforces this is based on the kind of language used, right? They want to keep it family friendly, and they do enforce it. So here are two examples of that. They shut down an extreme erotic role-playing guild that basically a 14-year-old's mother found out they were doing this pedophilic role-play, shut down. And then they also started patrolling certain servers and certain areas of certain servers so they could at least appear in the media like they're doing something to combat this. So my kind of idea is, well, we know people want this in games. I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable to want sexual content, so how can we give players what they want? I look at age verification. So Second Life, I'm not going to talk about, but they did something interesting in that they have 18 and over content, right? And they base this off of birth dates and profiles. So it was self-reported data. So there's no way you could actually be sure the people saying they're 18 were 18 to access this content. So then people say, well, what about driver's licenses, passports, entering in the number, checking that way? There's massive privacy concerns there, which I think is pretty obvious. So, but the cool thing is that if you were an 18 content, adult 18 content includes sexually explicit, intensely violent, or depictions of drug use. So really adult content. So what I'm thinking about is, in a solution to all of this, how can we kind of reach that market and turn a profit? And I'm really not a marketing person. Like, I'm probably the last person you would want to be telling you this, because I go into a grocery store and will spend an hour debating loo roll because I'm like, well, maybe I'll save some pennies, but maybe this one's too coarse. So I'm really not a good market-minded person. But I think that if you did something like make an adult add-on, like a package that you could go to a store, show your ID, buy, install in the game, have adult sexy fun times on an island somewhere, I think that would be a great way to go about it. Downloadable content. Role players are always asking for more outfits. Microtransactions, people, like there is a market here, I'm telling you. So concluding points overall, and I'm going to speak for the other people on my panel, just in the interest of being quick and snappy. Sex and love have a place in games, but include it responsibly. I think Me Too did a really good job of pointing out, like, actually reflect on your own sexuality when you're putting sexuality in games. And allow for a diversity of options, because we all know, we've been on the internet, we know people have a whole load of things that they like to do. And my point is, if it's not developed in the game, players will put it in anyway. So that's the bottom line. And if we develop it and we include the adult content in our development of it, then we can regulate it somehow. Then we can kind of manage, okay, who has access to it if we're selling it and you have to provide an ID in person to buy it. So that, kind of maybe will help with the whole pedophilia thing. And that's me done. Thank you.
Okay, how long do we have?
You've got probably 10, 15 minutes.
Oh, awesome. Wow, we're all out of time. Any questions? Is anyone brave enough? At the back over there, and then one there. So, whichever first. Right, and then to the back. Awesome.
Hi, that's all very laudable. My concern, there seems to be a rise in what could be called official prudishness. You see in the UK with the joys of the porn trial that was recently dismissed, and in the States with the rise of, I suppose, the evangelical lunatics and the Tea Party and everything else. While we maybe understand that there's a need for this, and gamers understand there's a need for this, how the hell are you going to go up against the kind of, I don't know, very powerful official desire to just not let this happen?
Is it okay if I answer it? Yeah. I guess my argument that they're going to do it anyway, and we know that they're doing it anyway, and Blizzard knows they're doing it anyway, so we can at least regulate it.
I mean, I wonder whether Ren, because obviously that's kind of your area as well.
Oh, I'm not here to spit. No, I'm
you wimp.
Well, I mean, the problem is everybody knows everyone does a lot of things anyway, but it's saying it in public, and that's one of the problems with regulation. I mean, there are games that do it that are quite hardcore multiplayer games, but they've got incredibly small markets for them, as you say. I think it's a mainstreaming of sex we probably need in some way. I mean, maybe as we were kind of talking in the session that I had before about kind of games and art, if we agree that games are art, then there's something we say about culture. They're part of culture. And generally speaking, I want the notion of being a gamer, an adult that plays, to be more culturally accepted. And part of that adults play with sex. So I hope it's part of that kind of general evolution that play is not synonymous either with triviality or childhood. And that's one of the big barriers, I think.
And I think unusually that this is also a position to sort of say that this isn't just a problem for games as well. It's a problem for everything. It's a problem for licensed sex. It's a problem for sexual advertising. So it's kind of that $1 million question, but then it's a $1 million question for film, for TV, for what's on during the adverts, for what kind of costumes they're wearing in the Olympics. So it is an elephant in the room, but it's an elephant in everybody's room. So
Hiya. I was interested to hear what your thoughts on the love and sex gameplay mechanics in the Fable series, sort of your opinion about that, and whether or not any more mainstream titles have kind of come close to hitting that kind of perfect combination.
You played a lot of Fable, haven't you?
I don't think I played enough of Fable, but do you want to talk about Dragon Age some more? Because I know you wanted to...
Yeah, I feel like I'm talking about Macbeth to talk about Hamlet there. I've got to confess, actually, I haven't played very much Fable since very much towards the beginning.
I haven't. I was a polygamist in it because I thought it was funny. So I guess that goes back to my thing, like it's okay to play around with these ideas and be a bit silly. And I think in Fable you had this, one of my friends, for example, had sex with so many people that he contracted all these STIs. And he actually glowed green and like infected people with his STIs by being in... And this is funny, right? Like this is okay. This is funny. Like we should encourage that. I think it's great.
Yeah. I mean, my kind of Dragon Age thing is kind of similar, but it's about the sort of love relationship thing as well. There were kind of two things. The first thing was that I was, because Alistair is the first character that you get, I started romancing him. And he seemed kind of cute and I kind of liked him. And he kissed me, or kissed my character, and I was like, oh my God, Alistair's kissed me. And there was Annika Wayne's actually written a paper about this, saying that there is a very kind of strong fan reaction to it. But I didn't realise that you could actually have sex with him. So I kept on going back for a little bit more. And then he asked me into his tent, and I was like, oh my God, you've like destroyed my, your pure, the sort of pureness of this relationship. But I think, again, this kind of idea of gifting is really problematic, because in Dragon Age, you can't get to that point unless you give them loads of shit what they like. You give them little things that are sort of specifically suited to them. And, although the dynamic is really nice, and although it was, again, a lot of things have been written about it, about how cool the relationships and how engaging they are and how well written they are. I mean, it's interesting that when Edge first reviewed it, they put out an article recently and they said, we really missed the mark. We didn't realise, we said kind of, I'm probably going to misquote anyone from Edge here, but they said, we didn't realise that what we thought was quite clunky, irritating cutscene dialogue was going to be so, engaged with by fans, and you're looking at machinima of all the sex scenes really quickly and all that kind of thing, that actually people did have that, for once people are watching cutscenes rather than a left click, So, yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult finding that balance between the whole kind of, oh my God, and, wow, I'm actually just giving somebody something. Again, the sort of sex machine, we put coins in.
Yeah,
Alistair's cock falls out, so,
But in Fable 3, you had to do that with the kids, though, because I had like 18 illegitimate children just running around the streets being like, Mom,
how
you
many
give me
did
a
you
gift.
take to the orphanage?
I think one game I wanted to mention, actually, which I totally slipped my mind when I was making the slides, was Hero Generations, which is a Facebook game by Scott Brody, which, again, it's sort of, it's basically about role-playing this sort of adventurer who goes out and you're sort of, you go and level up and stuff, but at some point you have to decide to settle down. And it's basically it essentially becomes being about the conflict between trying to pursue your sort of dreams and also start a family. So this sort of, you go to these different villages, and in the villages there'll be these girl characters who sort of like want you basically, and you sort of, they want different things from you, and you can fulfill certain ones of those requirements. And then when you settle down, that's it for you, and then your child, you then start playing the child character, and sort of, and so on, sort of down the generations, which I think is sort of like a nice other sort of aspect of all this stuff.
I actually wanted to ask you, so as a game designer, so Esther was saying that she had a sudden reaction when a game turned to a certain point sexual. I'm sure lots of people will have a kind of breakpoint reaction, whereas we're used to a game, getting progressively more violent. Is there some kind of design issues that we have with that? Maybe we have to, like, at the very start of a game, click, possibility of sexual content, or not possibility, so at least people are forewarned. Because even if you're not offended by it, it's probably going to be jarring, because it's just not sitting within the genre.
Right. I mean, I guess, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it is weird how we sort of treat these two things sort of in such wildly different ways. I think... I mean, I'm all for sort of like shaking up people's expectations of sort of what they're gonna encounter, and sort of like going against the norm of sort of what the expected norm in games and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting question, I guess. I would prefer not to. It depends obviously on the degree of sort of what's going to happen, but no. I mean, I think so. In designing Red Shirt, for example. So it's kind of a spiritual successor to Kudos 2 by Positech Games, which is like a life sim game as well. And in Kudos 2, Cliff Harris, who made it, had the option to enable gay relationships, essentially, or disable, and it was disabled by default. So you had to go into the options and enable it. And,
just like life.
And sort of, and I can understand why that sort of, why that was there, because I'm fairly sure that a lot of the audience who sort of would have started playing the game and then going, "Oh, I've got guys coming on to me. What's going on?" and like would have felt like uncomfortable with that, maybe. And I just don't. But I consciously made a decision in Red Shirt to just forego all of that. And it's like anyone could be attracted to anyone. Just that's life, So yeah.
And there's kind of two issues that intersect with that. Sorry, I can say very briefly, which is that kind of quite often relationships in games become quite moral quite quickly. So it is, okay, well, you've had sex with them, so you've got to settle down now, and that becomes an issue. So the sort of sex, love, playful aspect is suddenly changed into something that is kind of quite a sort of societal norm. And again, the sort of construction of gay characters, which again is another discussion, is quite problematic in the, you know, how, where, what kind of age range, you know, what's kind of going on when you're doing that, and how do you do it in order to sort of satisfy everybody. Again, the protests in Mass Effect for and by EA recently in that kind of angle, again, sort of proved that, you know, obviously gamers are never going to agree about what's going to happen, but, you know, there's just, it's such a can of worms the moment that you start to sort of think about all the things that are involved, that again, I think that's one of the reasons that it's so difficult to do in games, and so it's so pleasing when it's right as well.
So is it either?
I was just going to say, like, because games are art, we should just be able to, like, you know, they shouldn't be about pandering to the status quo, and we should just be able to. Sorry, I've just got really conscious of the that we're running out of time. But
People waving at us. Yes, we can take one short question.
But yeah, totally forgot what I was saying. But basically, yeah, like
Take the question.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Take the question. Yeah.
Does he have the mic already?
Does anyone have a question?
Just shout.
You brought up the end of us. Like,
Yes.
Does everyone hear me?
Yep.
You brought up the end
Yeah,
of us
yeah.
as an example of game mechanic being what drove the relationship between the two characters. And for me, that kind of ties into what we're talking about, or what was talked about with our games art. And there's so much talk about story, character work, acting, what else? Just
All the stuff that goes around.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Like work,
All the skinning, yeah.
Yeah, like stuff that you find in any animated movie, right?
Uh-huh.
So the one thing that games have is interaction
Yeah.
and movement. And there's, to me, a kind of understatement between how a story and how relationships are built up through gameplay narrative rather than superficiality of all the stuff you find in every other media form.
Yeah.
Can you think of any more examples and where you see that could go in the future when you're
Yeah, I don't
building
know.
up
Like, I guess
interactions with just interaction?
yeah. I mean, things which are sort of mechanically interesting in that respect are sort of harder to find. Definitely, I think make those games. I'd say is probably a good thing to close on. Yes, make more games about love.
Good. Thank you. So, thank you, Mita, Ashu. Oh my God, Mitu, Ashley, and Esther. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.